طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وعلى أصحابه وعلى أتباعه وعلى أزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين وعلينا معهم يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل عليه صلاة تحسن بها الأخلاق وتفتح بها الآفاق وتدفع بها المشاق توسع بها الأرزاق إن شاء الله رب العالمين. We are still with the journey, the blessed journey of the Seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our brother Dr. Ahmed was reciting in the Salat al-Isha the verses about the scriptures that were revealed before the Quran, the Torah and the Gospel, al-Injil, Torah wal-Injil. وفي الحديث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كما أورده الإمام ابن كثير: أعطيت مكان التوراة السبع الطوال. I was given instead of the Torah the seven longest surahs in the Quran. وأعطيت مكان الزبور المئين. I was given instead of the Psalms of the book of Sayyidina Dawood al-Zabur the surahs that have around 200 ayahs. وأعطيت مكان الإنجيل المثاني. I was given instead of the Gospel or the Injil the surahs that follow, which mean the surahs that are around 100 verses, and this will get us till Surah Qaf. وفضلت بالمفصل. And then it was kind of a privilege, an addition, to have the surahs that are shorter at the end of the Quran, from Surah Qaf till the end of the Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ tells us here that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ to encompass all the wisdom that was revealed in the scriptures before him, and to mark the Quran as the eternal challenge and miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. فالحديث يقول: ما من الأنبياء إلا وقد أعطي من المعجزات ما آمن عليه الناس. All prophets were given miracles, like temporary miracles, for their people to witness and to believe and to submit to. وإنما كان الذي أعطيته وحيا من عند الله. But my miracle is basically the permanent revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فأرجو أن أكون أكثرهم تابعا يوم القيامة. So I hope that my ummah would be the biggest in the day of judgment, inshallah, entering Jannah. And this means that the main miracle of the Prophet ﷺ was the Quran, the eternal challenge that no one of the mankind or jinkind can come up with a similar Quran or even part of it or a piece of it. This doesn't mean that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't have miracles. There are many other miracles that we will come across as we move on in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ loved him so much, loved him more than their own families, their own children, and their own selves. And they praised the Prophet ﷺ in poems, and they recited these poems in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he approved of that. وكان الحافظ ابن سيد الناس له كتاب اسمه ملح المدح, which is a book that is specially for all the poems that the Sahaba Ridwanullah alayhim composed in praising the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And over the years, the poets and the lovers of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam would recite poems remembering him and remembering places and landmarks in his seerah and in his life and in his Medina, the Medina of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. فأحد الشعراء يقول دع عنك سلمى وسلمى بالعقيق جرى. So, دع عنك سلمى وسلمى بالعقيق جرى. العقيق هو وادي العقيق في المدينة المنورة. وأم سلمى عن يعني والسل عن آله القدم. سلع هو كذلك جبل في المدينة المنورة، وهو الذي حقق البشارة الموجودة في التوراة عندما وصل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مهاجرا إلى المدينة. في التوراة يأتي المهاجر وتغرد بنات سالع من على الجبل، فكان هناك أن أنشد أهل المدينة طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع. المرة الماضية we stopped at how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started the secret period of the da'wah and the early Muslimin, and then how he was asked to make it overt to all the people in Mecca, and how he got an assembly of the people in Mecca, and then Abu Lahab said the bad words to him, and then the Surah Al-Masad was revealed to defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Today we continue by looking at the first Muslims, the early Muslims upon whom this religion was established. And we will just take examples from them because we don't have time to cover all the biographies of all the Sahaba Ridwanullah alayhim, but we will look only at key figures of them. One of them is Sayyidina Bilal ibn Rabah, one of the early Muslims and who endured in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's known as Mu'adhin al-Rasul, the first caller, Mu'azzin, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were more than one muazzin, but Sayyidina Bilal was the basic one. There was also Abu Mahdhura al-Jumahi, and there was a third one, but Sayyidina Bilal, whenever he is there, he would be the muazzin, the default muazzin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's known as Bilal al-Habashi. His father was bought as a slave from Abyssinia, Rabah, and then Bani Jumah from Quraysh made him marry one of their female slaves, who was her name was Hamama, and they gave birth to Sayyidina Bilal ibn Rabah. So he was born a slave, and he was of the people who were underprivileged and the weak in Mecca. But although he was weak in like stature and in money or in family or tribe, but he was one of the strongest in faith. So Sayyidina Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anhu was from the very few Islam. Some resources said that he was just one of 6 who accepted Islam at the very beginning. And this happened when Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq talked to him, and he directly accepted Islam, and he began to show his Islam. And so his master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, was a very bad man, and so he began to torture him. So he would take him into the blazing heat of Mecca and place on his chest a big rock, and then he would start whipping him and telling him, say that you believe in Allah wal Uzza, the idols of Quraysh. And he would keep saying, Ahadun Ahad. So no, it is not a Lat wal Uzza, it is just one God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ahadun Ahad. And the more he says it, the more Umayyah ibn Khalaf becomes very frustrated and very angry, and he whips him more and he tortures him more. And then Sayyidina Bilal says, لو أعلم كلمة أكثر إغاظة لكم لقلتها. So I don't care what you do to me. If I know a word that would make you madder, I would say it, just to glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The creed of Islam is so simple, and that's why it's accepted into the hearts of the mu'mineen directly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only one with no associates, and he is the creator, and every other thing other than Allah is created. It is all worship Allah and all submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. Sayyidina Bilal would then also tortured in many other ways. And one day Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq came to Umayyah ibn Khalaf and said to him, I would like to buy this slave from you who is making like trouble. and I will give you one of my slaves who didn't accept Islam and who is stronger. Umar ibn Khalaf said, I will sell him only at 40 ounces of gold. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq directly said, I agree, I accept. Here are the 40 ounces of gold. He said, oh, you are so a trash, Abu Bakr. If you would say only 4, I would have accepted. So he doesn't like deserve to pay for him 40 ounces. Only 4 would be enough. Then Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq says, and if you requested 400, I would have given you directly without hesitation. He is more than this. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab would say, Sayyiduna a'taqa Sayyidana. Sayyiduna Abu Bakr as-Siddiq a'taqa Sayyidana, set free Sayyidana Bilal. So both of them, Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab considers to be his masters and his Sayyidina. Sayyidina Bilal then migrated with the Prophet ﷺ to Medina, and he lived all his life at the service of the Prophet ﷺ, and he participated in the different ghazawat. And on Yawm al-Furqan, on Ghazwat Badr, he saw Umayyah ibn Khalaf. He saw this master, former master, who used to torture him. And once he said, who saw him, he said, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, لا نجوت إن نجا. So help me kill him, help me get my revenge from him. The Muslimin in Medina, Al-Ansar, don't know about Umayyah ibn Khalaf, so they asked him, just show him to us, and he showed them to him, and he could finally kill him in Ghazwat Badr, and it was Yawm al-Furqan. So from underneath the rock in Mecca, during the time of the early Islamic years, to the day of opening Mecca, Yawm Fath Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ asked Sayyidina Bilal to ascend the Kaaba, to ascend above the Kaaba, and to say the caller for adhan from there. And he was the only person who was allowed to say the adhan from above the Kaaba. And it was kind of a special treat that the Prophet ﷺ wanted to show the Muslimin concerning Sayyidina Bilal. In hadith he says, Bilal سابق الحبشة وسلمان سابق الفرس وصهيب سابق الروم. So he is one of the forerunners of these nations. Bilal is the forerunner of the Abyssinia, and Suhaib would be for the Romans, and Salman would be for the Persians. In another hadith he says, أفضل الحبش أفضل السودان. He says, أفضل السودان لقمان والنجاشي وبلال. So he groups them with Sayyidina Luqman, who was a wise man and a prophet. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Sayyidina Bilal became so sad, and he decided not to call the azan because his heart wouldn't bear to mention the name of the Prophet ﷺ, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, because he used to say Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah in the adhan while looking at the house of the Prophet ﷺ. And in Salat al-Fajr, he would say, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm ya Rasulullah. So in the adhan, he is speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. So he wouldn't do the adhan after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. Only once. And in the books it says that Sayyidah Fatima asked him to do the azan to remind her of the days of her father, or other sources say it was Sayyidina Al-Hasan wal-Hussein. They asked him to say the azan as he used during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And because they are the beloved ones and the beloved asbat of the Prophet ﷺ, he agreed to do this. So he ascended and he began to say the adhan, but when he came to Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, he started to weep and cry, and he couldn't complete it. And that's why he descended and he couldn't do it. He went to Sham then to participate in the fightings and in the conquests in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and died there, and this is his grave in Damascus. Another person of the early Muslimin upon whom the religion was established is Sayyidina Ammar ibn Yasir radiyallahu anhu. And the whole family of Sayyidina Ammar ibn Yasir, his mother Sumayya, was the first martyr in Islam. And his father Yasir was also among the early Muslimin who were killed. Sayyidina Ammar ibn Yasir although he was tortured and tormented a lot in his early life. I mean, he was near to the age of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he lived to the age of 95. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ammar taqatuluhu al-fi'atu al-baghiyah." So Ammar was a mark for truth, for those who are aided with the truth. So during the fitna between Sayyidina Ali and Muawiyah, some of the Sahaba didn't know where is the right, where is the truth, but they knew that whoever kills Ammar are people who are the wrongdoers. So during these different wars, they would just move behind Ammar. Whenever Ammar goes, they go after him. So all the Sahaba, whether old or young, they would just follow the steps of Ammar till they see who would kill him. And when he was killed and became a martyr, most of them just stopped killing and stopped participating in the war, or resided with Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. The third person is Khabbab ibn al-Arat. And Khabbab was also one of the slaves, and his lady was called Anmar al-Khuzaiyyah. And Anmar used to torture him and oppress him in a different way. She would get like a rod of iron and then would make it very heated by fire, and then she would put that rod on his head, and he would cry from that, and they would ask him to leave Islam and to get back to their idol worshipping, and he would not do it. Ammar ibn Yasir that we spoke about, one day he was tempted into his religion. So under all the difficult torture, he had to say that he does not believe in Islam. And then he came to the Prophet ﷺ hurrying and weeping and crying and said, I'm become an infidel and become a disbeliever. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him why. He said, because I said this. Then the Prophet said, وَمَا تَجِدُ وَكَيْفَ تَجِدُ قَلْبَكَ? And how is it like in your heart? He says, أُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولُهُ. I still believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet. He then said, إِنْ عَادُوا فَعُدْ. This is kind of a license for you that you may say something bad if you have to, if you really have to, in order to save your life, but in your heart you are believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his Prophet. And in the Quran then was revealed, إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. Khabbab ibn al-Arat then, subhanallah, he was also set free by Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And after he was set free, he was just working in making swords. And his lady, Anmar, then had a headache, a consistent headache, a very severe headache. And she would never stop the pain of the headache unless she is touched by a rod of iron that is heated. And so they would go to Khabbab ibn al-Arat and ask him to get one of the swords very much heated and to put it on the head of his lady, who used to torture him in the same way. Other Sahaba at the beginnings of Islam include some of the female Sahabiyat, like Zinnira, sometimes it's also pronounced Zunaira, and Lubayna. Zinnira, for example, was tortured and oppressed till she lost her eyesight. And then the Mushrikeen would say, yeah, she lost her eyesight because she disbelieved in Al-Lat wal-Uzza. If she believes in Al-Lat wal-Uzza, her eyesight would come back to her. And she would say, no, this is not true. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gave me this test, and I'm accepting the test of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah wills, then my sight would come back. And then she would come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam complaining from what the mushrikeen said to her. Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then praised to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by the grace of Allah, her eyesight comes back to her. Lubayna was the female slave of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, before his Iman, before his Islam, was also one of the mushrikeen who was torturing the early Muslimin. So he would whip and hit Lubayna for so long. And then finally he would say, أعتذر إليك إنما تركتك إملالا. I just got bored. I cannot just hit you anymore. But then she would say, لكن الله يعذبك ولا يمل إن لم تسلم. So if you got bored from hitting me, if you do not become a Muslim, if you do not accept Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will torture you and there will be no boredom and no one will be bored. And this touched the heart of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, and this was one of the steps for accepting Islam for him later on. So these were just some of the examples of the early Muslimin and how they carried the da'wah and how they endured in the face of Allah, in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was only after 40 of these early Muslimin accepted Islam that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it public to the people of Quraysh. And he himself, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, received many of the oppression from the people in Quraysh. So they began to send people to Abi Talib and to tell him, your nephew is making ridicule of our idols, and he is not just practicing his religion in silence, and he is advocating for this new religion, which will make us lose our dignity and our status within all the Arabs. So make him stop. And then Abu Talib would come to the Prophet ﷺ and ask him to stop or not to move on with da'wah. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, يا عمي والله لو وضعوا الشمس في يميني والقمر في يساري على أن أترك هذا الأمر ما تركته حتى يظهره الله تعالى أو أهلك فيه. So if they would get the whole sun into my right arm and right hand and the moon on my left hand and ask me to take these and just to leave Islam, I would never do this until I perish or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it victorious. Second time they came to Abu Talib and said, we know that you love this nephew of yours a lot. So take Umar ibn al-Walid. Umar ibn al-Walid was the brother of Khalid ibn al-Walid, and he was so handsome and so well built, like an athlete. And they said, you see, this is like a young man, so handsome and well built. Take him and give us Muhammad and we will deal with him. And so you have got like another nephew or another child to raise rather than the one that you give us. And then Abu Talib said, بئس ما عرضتم علي. This is a very bad thing that you say. أعطيكم ابني تقتلوه وآخذ ابنكم أغذوه لكم. You give me your son so that I feed him, and you take my son in order to kill him. Umar ibn al-Walid, we will come back to him later on when we speak about the first hijrah to Habasha, to Abyssinia. We have seen this before. We said that this is like a diagram of how the house of the Prophet ﷺ looked like in Mecca when we spoke about Sayyidah Khadija and the house of Sayyidah Khadija. And it was not built in this way, but this is the last building, the last shape of the building that was documented in books of travelers. So in fact, this was drawn by an Orientalist, a non-Muslim who pretended to be a Muslim like 150 years ago. And he went to Mecca, Burkhardt, his name is Burkhardt. And then he saw the house of the Prophet ﷺ in this design, and he drew it to us. Later on, it was like kind of destroyed, and it became part of the courts of Al-Haram. So what's important here is this part. This part is called Al-Mukhtaba. Al-Mukhtaba means the hiding place. This is where the Prophet ﷺ used to pray inside his house. But then he would raise his voice with Al-Quran. So his neighbors, and one of his neighbors was Abu Jahl himself, and Abu Lahab, and his wife, Jamil, or they called her in the books Al-Awra bint Harb. They would throw on him stones and pebbles and thorns and stuff from above the house, because most of the houses were not having like ceilings like this. Part of the house would open in order to get the sun and get air. So the Prophet ﷺ had to hide from this in this place, just getting al-Mukhtaba. And this is how the house looked like 70 or 80 years ago, before it became part of the court, as we said. And it is this green part of the court outside the mountain of Al Marwa. This video gives us another mark to better mark where the house of the Prophet ﷺ exactly is. You can see here that the floor is in white, in plates that are white, but these are bigger plates and these are smaller ones, smaller cubic ones, or in the shape of squares. So the parts where it is small, this is the house of the Prophet ﷺ and Sayyidah Khadija. So you see the difference. These are not part of the house. This is part of the house. So this is outside of the house. This is Al-Jabal Al-Marwa. And now this is part of the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and around it are the green barriers. And you can see it's marked clearly with this special size of the plates. So he would endure from his people lots and lots of oppression. One day, Abu Jahl came to the Prophet ﷺ while he was prostrating in front of the Kaaba. And he said to the people around him, I'm going to stamp his head using my feet, put my feet on his head. And when he came nearer to the Prophet ﷺ, he became very scared and ran back. Then the people laughed at him and said, why didn't you do what you said? He said, لَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَهُ خَنْدَقًا مِنْ نَارٍ. I have seen a trench between me and him that is filled with fire. In another narration, it says, رَأَيْتُ فَحْلًا يَكَادُ أَنْ يَأْخُذَنِي. There was like a lion or a big camel that is wild, and it was about to eat me and to bite me, so I couldn't go there. In another episode, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and got a big rock, and he said, I will just smash his head with this rock. And then he carried the big rock and went to the Prophet ﷺ while he was prostrating in front of the Kaaba, and then his hands became dry on the rock. It became part of the rock, like rock as the rock itself. And he couldn't move away, and he couldn't do whatever he do unless he gets back from where he came. And then he said, ظهر لي فحل من الإبل والله ما رأيت مثله قط هم بي أن يأكلني. I saw this mad camel. And the Prophet ﷺ said, ذاك جبريل لو دنا لأخذه. This was one of the manifestations of Sayyidina Jibreel, and if he approached me more than this, he would have been taken and scattered into pieces. Another episode was with a person who was one of the ignorants, and this person is called Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. They call him in the books of Seerah Ashqa al-Qawm, the most unhappy person in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt was from a tribe that was not so honorable, and so he liked to have honor by inviting people of honorable tribes to come to his house. So one day he made a big banquet, and he slaughtered some of the camels, and then he went to all the leaders in Mecca and asked them to come to his house just to have this honor. And he went to the Prophet ﷺ as one of the key figures of Quraysh. And he said, أحببت أن تأتي إلي. I wish that you come to my house and eat from my food. The Prophet ﷺ said, I do not eat from food that was slaughtered for idols and not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt said, what should I do for you in order to come to my house? He said, if you accept Islam and say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah and say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Allahu Akbar on your food, I will accept and come to you. I said, okay, I accept Islam. And he said the Shahada. And the Prophet ﷺ came to his house. And he was a friend of Ubay ibn Khalaf, one of the big enemies of Islam. And Ubay ibn Khalaf at this time was in Sham, and the Levant, and trade. When he came back, he found Aqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt and he knew about what he did. So he said to him, لا يقرب لساني لسانك. I will never speak to you. He said, what should I do in order for you to become my friend back again? He said, you go to Muhammad, you say that you disbelieve in Islam, you insult him, you spit into his face. You do these things, and then I will be your friend back. He said, I will do for you. And then he came to the Prophet ﷺ. He said that he does not accept Islam, and he began to insult the Prophet ﷺ. And when he tried to spit into the face of the Prophet ﷺ, the salvia of his mouth just were retracted on his own face, and it left some burning in his own face, and it was a mark known for him later on, and he suffered from this. And for this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سبيلا يا ويلتى ليتني لم أتخذ فلانا خليلا. And he's referring to Ubay ibn Khalaf. One other day, they said, now this is the filth of one of the slaughtered animals and beasts in Mecca, and this is the part that even animals and like dogs would never eat because it is so filthy. So who would like to take this filth and put it on the Prophet while he is prostrating? And they were like keeping awe and respect to the Prophet ﷺ, although he is still their enemy. But Aqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt, because he wanted to become like a man of achievement among them, and he had this inferiority complex, he said, I will do this. And he took the filth and he put it on the house in the back of the Prophet ﷺ, and he moreover strangled the neck of the Prophet ﷺ. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says, وَأَنَا قَائِمٌ أَنظُرُ. I was looking and I couldn't do anything, and it was so heartbreaking for me to see this. But who would help that with the Prophet ﷺ? One of the female slaves ran quickly to the house of the Prophet ﷺ and told his household. Sayyidah Fatima Zahra was a young girl. She came hastening and quickly, and she removed that from her father's back, and she got him up and got him back to her house. And so the Prophet ﷺ looked at them and said, Allahumma shdid wat'ataka alayhim. Allahumma a'tihim sinina ka siniyi Yusuf. The Prophet ﷺ began to make supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to make it hard for them and to inflict them with famine, like the 7 years that were inflicted on in the time of Sayyidina Yusuf. And then he looked at Aqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt especially, and he says, وَإِنَّا قَاتِلُوكَ صَبْرًا. وَإِنَّا قَاتِلُوكَ صَبْرًا. You will be killed, but in a special way. And this way is that you will be imprisoned in order to be killed. This is called the sabr, al-isbar lil-qatl. This means that you imprison somebody in order to be killed later on. So he knows that he will be killed. And in doing this, this is more like suffering and torture for him, and oppression for him, rather than just directly killing him. And this happened in Ghazwat Badr. In Ghazwat Badr, after the Prophet ﷺ became victorious, and 70 of the mushrikeen were killed, and 70 others were taken as captives, one additional person was imprisoned. This was Aqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. And they kept him with the Muslim army on the way back to Medina. When it was just one day to reach Medina, and a place called Arq al-Dhabya, the Prophet ﷺ asked that Aqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt would come now in order to be killed, and everyone would witness this. He would say, لِمَا تَصْبِرُنِي لِلْقَتْلِ. Why do you imprison me in order to be killed? He said, بِمَا فَعَلْتَ بِي فِي مَكَّةِ وَبِمَا اسْتَهْدَأْتَ بِكَلَامِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. One day, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq also came very quickly, and he like cleared the people around the Prophet ﷺ and said, أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَن يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهُ, which was then revealed as piece of the ayah in Surah Ghafir. Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq himself endured lots of torture and lots of sufferings from the mushrikeen in Quraysh. So one day he was like reciting the Quran, and then the mushrikeen came to him and began to hit him and to kick him with their own feet and hit him so strongly. And Utbah ibn Rabi'a, one of them, would get his shoes, and his shoes was made of wood, so it was kind of very sharp edged, and then he would hit, they said, Abu Bakr on his face using these wooden shoes, that his face then would be swollen, that you would not know whether this is a face or this is the back of the face. And the people of Banu Taym said that حتى كانوا لا يشكون في موته. So they just carried Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq to his house, and they have no doubt that he died. I mean, he is totally like kicked off with all of what they have been doing to him. And then when he gets his consciousness back, the first thing he says, what did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? So he sends his mother, the mother of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, إلى أم جميل بنت أخت عمر ibn al-Khattab. She was secretly a Muslim, and she was concealing her Islam. And the mother of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq would ask him, Abu Bakr asks about Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And because she was afraid, she said, I don't know Muhammad and I don't know Abu Bakr. She said, he asks you, she said, تريدين أن أخرج معك? Would you like me to come with you? He said, yes. Then she comes to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq then says, tell her what happened to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She said, this is your mother, she is hearing us. He said, لا عليك منها إنها لا تفشي سرك. She would keep the secret. They said, هو سالم, he is sound, he's quiet, he's good. He said, أين هو? She says, in Dar al-Arqam. So, okay, now you've got news that the Prophet ﷺ is okay, is sound, is unhurt, and he is in Dar al-Arqam. But Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, لا أذوق طعام. I will never eat. ولا أشرب شرابا. I will never drink. إلا وآتي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. And he was totally kind of distorted with all the oppression that he received. So his mother said, فأمهلناه حتى إذا هدأت الأرجل وسكن الناس, when it became like tranquil and people stopped their movement, and then we took him out of the house. يتكئ علينا. He was putting his hands on our shoulders because he couldn't walk easily. And then he went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Dar al-Arqam. فرقره رقة شديدة. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so much touched by this, كب عليه يقبله, and started to kiss Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and the whole Muslimin said something like this. And while Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was in this state, he said, Ya Rasulullah, this is my mother. أدعو الله لها أن تكون من المسلمين. Pray for her that she would become a Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ asks her to embrace Islam, and she accepts directly, and this becomes like the glad tidings by the end of a very hard day for Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Other of the Sahaba, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who was the first one to recite the Quran overtly in Mecca. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, who would be wrapped in a cover made of straw, and then this would be made with smoke, and he is about to be choked. Ammar ibn Yasir and his mother Sumayya, who was killed by Abu Jahl, and she was the first martyr of the Muslimin. By doing this, we enter to the 5th year of Ba'tha. Now we have a new way of reference in the history. We said that the Prophet ﷺ was born in the year of the elephant. So this was the way that they were marking the events in history, the year of the elephant. Before the year of the elephant, people would have a reference to the death of Ka'b ibn Lu'ay. So they would say, this is how many years from the year where Ka'b ibn Lu'ay was died or passed away. And then when the event of the elephant happened, then this was the year of the elephant. The historians of the Seerah then would say when their message came to the Prophet ﷺ, this would mark the 40th year of his life, and the first year of Ba'tha, which is the first year of receiving the message. And the first year of receiving the message, this would go up to 13 years. So 13 years of Ba'tha in Mecca. After the 13th year, then we have the first year of Hijrah. So the first year of Hijrah would be the 14th year of Ba'tha. So in the fifth year of Ba'tha, fifth year after the message, the Prophet ﷺ tried to find another resort to the Muslimin to migrate to. And it was at this time that verses in the Quran were revealed, وَأَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةٌ ومن يهاجر في سبيل الله يجد في الأرض مراغما كثيرا وسعة ومن يخرج من بيته مهاجرا إلى الله ورسوله ثم يدركه الموت فقد وقع أجره على الله والله غفور رحيم كان الله غفورا رحيما. So knowing that they can migrate and they can leave Mecca and they can flee with their own religion, the Prophet ﷺ began to think about the appropriate place to go to. Ta'if, Yathrib, whatever place around is still part of the power of Mecca, and they come to the Meccan during the season of Hajj, and so it will not be a safe place for them. So he thought of a faraway place that has got justice in it, which was the Abyssinian lands. And he said, اذهبوا إلى الحبشة فإن بها ملكا لا يظلم عنده أحد. And this hadith was also related. من فر بدينه من أرض إلى أرض وإن كان شبرا من الأرض استوجبت له الجنة وكان رفيق أبيه إبراهيم خليل الله ونبيه محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Whoever flees with his religion from one land to the another land, even if you just move a very little distance, then you will have Jannah prescribed for you, and you would be the companion of Sayyidina Ibrahim al-Khalil and Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In response to this invitation to migrate, 14 of the early Muslimin decided to migrate to Abyssinia, and they included Sayyidina Uthman and his wife Ruqayya, whom he married after she was divorced from Utbah ibn Abi Lahab. Also Abu Salama wa Salama and Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and his wife Asma bint Umays. Sayyidina Uthman is known as Dhun Nurayn. Why is he known as Dhun Nurayn? He married the two daughters of the Prophet, so each one of them is a nur, is a light. So Dhun Nurayn, Zawj al-Bintayn, Sahib al-Hijratayn. He went also into the two hijras, one to Abyssinia and the other one to Medina. And Sayyidina Abu Salama or Salama later on would become one of the mothers of the faithfuls, of the believers, when the Prophet ﷺ marries her after the death of her husband Abu Salama. Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, and his wife Asma bint Umays. Asma bint Umays is also a very important key figure in the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. She married Ja'far and she gave birth to a child called Muhammad ibn Ja'far. And then Ja'far became a martyr, and she married Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And she gave birth to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and she gave birth to him on the way to Hujjat al-Wada'. And in fact, by giving birth to him while they were entering Mecca, she also established, or she was the cause to establish one of the rulings on fiqh for ladies who have their menses or give birth. What should they do? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "If'ali kulla shay, walakin la tatufi bil bayt." So this was the ruling for her. And then Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq died, and she married Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib. So she married three of the key figures of the Sahaba. One day when she was the wife of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, her two sons, Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr and Muhammad ibn Ja'far, were old enough, and they quarreled. And one would say, Abi afdalu min abik. And the other say, no, Abi afdalu min abik. My father is better than your father. And she is the mother of both. Sayyidina Ali ibn Talib would look and say, Ahkumi baynahuma. You know both fathers, so you become the judge. Tell them. She said, ما رأيت شابا مثل جعفر وما رأيت كهلا مثل أبي بكر. There is none young man like Ja'far, and there is none middle-aged like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Sayyidina Ali said, ويحك وما تركت لنا. And what about me? وَلَوْ قُلْتِ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ لَمَقَتْتُكَ. But you said the truth. And if you say otherwise, I would hate you. So you said the truth. Sayyida Asma would tell us later on about many things that happened in Abyssinia and many lessons that she learned from there. So they moved from Mecca and they came to a nearby old port near to Jeddah. Jeddah is here. So they came here and this port was called Ash-Shu'aiba. So this was an older port. And they found, to their happiness, a ship that is ready to sail to Axiom. Axiom was the capital city of Abyssinia. So they just got into the ship and they landed on Maswa, which is today in Eritrea. And they stayed there for a few days in order to take permission from Najashi to come to Axiom and to stay there. And and they took like a prayer place in order to make the prayer. We said that the prayer, as 5 prayers, was only prescribed during Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. But before that, there was 2 prayers, one in the morning and one in the evening. And there is differences among the scholars, whether it was complete prayer of ruku' and sujood or just tasbih. But there are also evidences that it was a complete prayer of sujood and ruku'. So they built their mosque. In fact, of course, this is not how they built it, but this is the place where they used to pray, and it was later on built after that. Until they received the permission from Najashi Ashama to come to Axiom and to stay there. So they went there in Rajab. This is Rajab that we are now, one of Al-Ashhur al-Hurum, and it was the 5th year of Ba'tha. And they came back in Shawwal in the 5th year of Ba'tha. So this is just 4 months, right? Rajab, Sha'ban, Ramadan, Shawwal, only 4 months. They stayed only for 4 months. So why did they come back so early? Because of what happened in Mecca. So what happened in Mecca is very interesting. The Prophet ﷺ was revealed to him Surah Al-Najm, and the Quran was really like overwhelming to all the Arabs in Mecca and to the Quraysh, who are masters of the language and masters of the eloquence of the language. And so they tried to not to listen to the Quran. Whenever the Prophet would recite the Quran, they would just make any fuss in order not to concentrate. لا تسمعوا لهذا القرآن والغوا فيه. So والغوا فيه, so don't give him an opportunity to say the complete words or the complete ayahs, rather, because he would make a magic for you. This would be magic, and then you will follow him. So they wouldn't give themselves the chance to listen. But this day, because of the glory and the nur and the light of the ayat in Surah Al-Najm, they all kept calm. And this was the opportunity for all of them to listen to the last ayah. And nearer to the last ayah, the Quran says, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكَ تَتَمَارَى هَذَا نَذِيرٌ مِّنَ النُّذُرِ الْأُولَى أَزِفَتِ الْآزِفَةُ لَيْسَ لَهَا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ كَاشِفَةٌ أَفَمِنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ تَعْجَبُونَ وَتَضْحَكُونَ وَلَا تَبْكُونَ وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوا. And because they understood the Arabic language perfectly, they couldn't but obey. This was a direct order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوا. So they all prostrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everyone in Mecca prostrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of the Kaaba. Even Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira was an old man, and he had like some back pain, so he couldn't prostrate, but he got piece of the sand from the earth and put it on his forehead just to mark that he prostrated with awe. Once the Prophet ﷺ finished, they looked at each other and they said, what happened to us? Why did we do this? And then the news came out that all of Quraysh now accepted Islam, and all of Quraysh now prostrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this news was carried to the people in Abyssinia, telling them, why should you stay in exile? You can come back now to Mecca because they have already embraced Islam, and وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. But in Mecca, the leaders spoke to themselves. You knew what you did. So people who would come to the season of Hajj would blame us for what we did. So what should we say? What should we say to them? Why did we prostrate? Then they said, okay, let's say that because Muhammad praised our idols, we prostrated to our idols. In Surah Al-Najm, there is أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. So they just got some of their poets to add تِلْكَ هِيَ الْغَرَانِيقُ الْعُلَى وَإِنَّ شَفَاعَتَهُنَّ لَتُرْتَجَى. So these are the causes that will get us closer to Allah, and their intercession is something that we hope for. This is not part of the Quran, and this is not the music of the Quran or the style of the Quran, but they just added this and said, because Muhammad said this, we prostrated. So we did not prostrate to his God, we prostrate to our gods. And this was called Hadith al-Gharaniq. But the people from Abyssinia, when they came, and then they had the shock that they are back now to the oppressors and they have not been turned to Islam. This was really a big dilemma and a big problem for them. So they had to go back again to Abyssinia. And this time, the Prophet ﷺ asked them to go and not to come back until he sends to them to come back. So this time, 84 of men and women went to Abyssinia. And this time, they stayed till the 7th year of Hijrah. So from the 5th year of Ba'sa to the 7th year of Hijrah. How many years are these? 14 years. Yeah, because we say that 5th year of Ba'sa, and then you continue till the year 13. And then the year 14 will be the first year of Hijrah. So after 13, you go on, then you will find 7 years. And 13 minus 5, you will have 8 years. So this will be 15 or 14 years. And this was the time of Fath Khaybar. And the Prophet ﷺ, once he was in Khaybar, he met Ja'far when he came back from Abyssinia and says, لا أدري بأيهما أفرح بفتح خيبر أم بعودة جعفر. But the people of Quraysh did not stop there, and they had to make a trek in order to get them back to Mecca. So what happened in Abyssinia? Was the delegation from Quraysh successful in getting the Muslimin back? 14 years of reside in Abyssinia. What did the Muslimin do? What events happened to them there? And at the same time, what happened to the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca? What are the miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him show to the people of Quraysh? Was there really an Indian Sahabi who met the Prophet ﷺ? All of these we will see next episode, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.